Yep. You know that I teach a course at Vernon University for nurses. And the first week of the class, which was this week, they are to study or reflect upon what their worldview is, how they view the world, how they understand things, the components that they So the prime reality, the idea of the universe, how we understand the universe, how we understand the human person, how we understand knowledge, how we understand ethics and morality, and what becomes the motivation, the purpose that we have. All of those are related and speak to the question and the issue of worldview. So a lot of that is shaped by our families, growing up in our families, that we tend to share the worldview of our families. It is shaped by culture, the kind where we live, geographically, socially, ethnically, whatever. There's lots of things that influence how our worldview develops and how we live out of that worldview. And it struck me today because sometimes in the first week, the nurses are just struggling, and I always fully understand. I mean, here they are, men and women who are working 12-hour shifts a day, back to back. They all have families in some way. And then on Monday, they get smacked with a course that requires tons of reading, writing papers, and lots of studying. And so it's like, wow, how do they even manage to hold it all together with that? So one student this week, and it struck me because it doesn't happen often, which is okay. I fully understand given all of that. But she said that what struck her about the readings on worldview is how important it is to take time to reflect on one's worldview. One of the readings says that this is an unconscious thing that we work out of, and I go, I don't know if it's unconscious, meaning that there's a point at which we articulate it in such a way that it's no longer unconscious, but now it's fully intentional in our lives. Again, we may not put all those words to it or articulate it in the way that I've described it, but we still have a sense of what we believe, why we believe, and the perspective that leads us to those beliefs. And what struck me was the idea of meditation or focusing on oneself or reflection. And in my mind, it came up, and I believe that it was Socrates who said this. And so this is your $100 words today, all right, that you can use in your pleasure out there in the world. But I believe Socrates says something like this: an unexamined life is not worth living. Meaning that if we go through life without ever stopping, taking stock of ourselves, reflecting on who we are and what we're about, that we don't have as strong a purpose and meaning, or really as strong a commitment to value that we might have otherwise if we do some self-reflection and self-critique perhaps, but do some take time to do that. And I say that because I'm convinced today that Americans are not, we're not a people who spend a lot of time reflecting on ourselves. And we get moved by whatever the latest power that be that shapes us rhetorically, whether it's on the advertisements on TV or whatever, social media or news, right? We know how influential those are in our life because everything comes at us so fast and so quickly that we don't have time to really reflect on it and to consider it. I often think of that, say, in my parents' generation, that the news, say, for instance, during World War II, how long did it take the news to go from the front to them? A long time. I mean, a week or 2 weeks or more sometimes, because they didn't have TV for one, and radio wasn't always the vehicle that gave instant information, right? Or if they went to the movies, it was one of those movie videos, right? Not even movie videos, not even what they would even use that word. What was it? The newsreel that told them, right? And then I don't just not thinking about it right now, but along comes in the 70s, I believe, when CNN comes along, where it's now 24-hour news feed, and now it's like any second you can tap into social media or the TV or wherever and get instant information, which means that you have to react to it so quickly and so fast that you can't process the information, and therefore run it through all of those filters that enable you to, one, think critically about the information, and two, be able to respond in a reasonable fashion to what it is that you're reacting to or reading or understanding. So I say that because a question from the gospel, as we're following this journey of Jesus from Galilee to Jerusalem, we saw, remember, a few weeks ago, the gospel challenged us into thinking, who was our neighbor? And the conclusion of it was that we need to be able to move from one place to another in thinking who our neighbor is, because if we continue to think that neighbor means only those people that are like us, live in the same neighborhood, quote, as we do, who think like us, who look like us, then we're going to miss it. Because neighbor are those who are outside, the Samaritan. And remember that the story is not to so much reflect on the person in the gutter who's been terribly savaged by robbers, but rather to put ourselves in the Samaritan place. And that's hard to move from one place where we've always been told that certain people are not to be associated. Don't play with, I remember that, don't play with Johnny because he's family, And as much as adults would tell children, don't, that person is different from you. We lived in a white neighborhood growing up, so the first time that you saw a black student, your age, it was kind of like, what an oddity, And then pretty soon you see how you begin to react and respond to them because you're not familiar with them. You have no clue where they come from, what they're about, because they're different from you. That's what the Samaritan story was about. We saw the story of Martha and Mary, and there the question and issue in a traditional form is don't be Martha, worried and anxious about many things. Be Mary. In other words, don't be focused on active reality, but rather be passive. And how many of us grew up in a spirituality in the church that especially told women, right? Don't speak out, don't stand up, don't be like Mary, passive, submissive, and quiet, especially quiet. Don't talk a whole lot, right? One of the TV shows that we're watching right now, Stargate Atlantis, there's a doctor on Stargate Atlantis, where just like I scream at the TV, will you shut up? He just is constantly talking, and therefore he's not paying attention to anything that's going on. But anyway, that's off the topic. But the point in the Martha and Mary story is not so much be one or the other, but find a way to offer hospitality in such a way that it is a true expression of discipleship, being at the feet of Jesus, listening and being attentive, so that whatever you do, whether it's the way Martha was or the way Mary was, you're doing it with the focus on Jesus and who he is and what he's about. And then last week we had the story of the Lord's Prayer, and there we saw, and the primary thing that I wanted us to get a sense of was that in that prayer, it's a dangerous thing we're praying. We're praying for the kingdom to immediately be established. And that means that we need to be ready, not just attentive, but ready to embrace it, which is necessarily going to mean a change in who we are and what we're about and the direction and the goals. And it really does mean changing the worldview that we have. That we have to embrace the worldview of the reign of God and all of its values and all of its focus points and all of its systems and structures, if there are any. That's what we're going to have to do. Remember, especially the one that we forgive others' debts before we expect our debts to be forgiven. So that it requires of us in this worldview of the reign of God is to always be focused and attentive on the others. That brings us, and there's like 34, 50 verses between last week and this week in the Gospel of Luke. It comes to this, and the question is, they're arguing over inheritance. At the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, in the infancy narrative, depending upon how you translate it, it tells of the birth of Jesus this way. And she gave birth. Now, this is how I'm going to, taking about 10 minutes of explanation into 1 minute. The translation says, and she gave birth to her son, the firstborn. Could mean many things, but the sense of it is that Jesus is the one who is going to inherit the promises of the Father, of God, in this sense. So that as the inheritor of everything that comes that God has, it doesn't necessarily mean the inheritor of material reality, but it means to inherit the vision, the purpose, the intent of God. So that's what we see as the gospel unfolds, is that Jesus is clearly not just doing the will of God, but also inheriting the vision of God for reality that sees him right at the beginning of his ministry, touching lepers, associating with the outcast, healing the sick, being one who goes out of his way to engage others at the level of their equal dignity and humanity. So that's the vision of God. That's what Jesus inherits. So now come to this text, give me my share of the inheritance. Well, it's obvious from the context of the text is that it has to do with property and value, right? I grew up as an only child, so of course I was going to get everything. So yeah, I didn't really care about anything else. You know, I'm the one, and you always have to be careful confessing things to your congregation, right? I'm the one who, I don't remember exactly, but I do remember how now I feel about what I did. But I must have been about 10 or 11 and had all the kids in the neighborhood come to a birthday party, backyard birthday parties you can only have in the Midwest in the middle of summer, right? And I thought I should win all the prizes. It was my birthday. Why shouldn't I do that? Right? So sometimes the attitude, maybe if I would have had brothers or sisters, I probably would have still had that attitude because I'm the firstborn. What do you expect, right? I did everything. I remember that after my mother died, my father and I went down to the property office, to the deeds office, to make sure that the house that I had grown up in, their house, that it would be easily inherited by me. Again, why? We just needed to make a legal document that says so. Would you believe they recorded it wrong? It's like, there's no debtors out there. It had to go through probate. My father didn't even have a credit card. He had one credit card, a Sears credit card, if you ever know what that was all about. And he would charge $10 to it just so he could keep the card. You never know what emergency might arrive. So I knew there were no debts outstanding. It cost me over $1,000 to go through the lawyer to get my inheritance right for me. There were no other children around, nobody else. So, and So this argument about inheritance at the level of material reality, but also think about it. What is it that you see? This is where white supremacy and white nationalism comes. And, I'm hearing it in some of the political ads. One just the other day just struck me like, make America what it's supposed to be. And I thought, what does that mean? Make America what is it supposed to be? And so I asked the friends, and about 3 people responded. Well, they all responded the way I thought they would be. Friends of mine, right? All my other friends have abandoned me because of things that I felt on Facebook. That's fine, Well, you see, in hearing it, and this is that the inheritance that they think they own and possess is an inheritance that I had this argument with one of the nurses, that even though the founding document of our nation, the Declaration of Independence, says that it comes to our attention that in God's world, all men are created equal. Well, we know that was maybe a fine ideal, but it was not true as to what they believed. Why, if it was true, why do we need, the 14th Amendment that gave African Americans the right of personhood and the right privilege to vote? Why the 19th Amendment? That if women were equal, then shouldn't they have been voting from the very beginning of our country rather than waiting until the 1920s? So you see the inheritance that some say we want to inherit something has to mean in that sense that the inheritance has to do with privilege, with power, with the freedom and the right, whether it's based upon law or even religion, to discriminate against the very people that the Samaritan story said we should be associating with. So you see how the issue of give me my inheritance. So this, as you hear the story, the focus is on this fellow who doesn't know what to do with the abundance that he has. And so he says, I'm going to pull down what I've got and build more. And so embedded kind of in our American worldview says that the bigger, the better. The more, the merrier, right? You just go through the whole scenario of things that keep telling us, bigger must be what we all want, right? So you go from your tiny little 1962 Fiat, that stick shift into a Tesla electric vehicle. Then you made it, right? Then there's somebody. You move, right? We all gotta move. Maybe now, not so much in the last few months and years, but you keep moving up and moving up. I love it when I watch these home shows. They've got, they grew up in a home like I did, 2.5 bedrooms. I lived in a bedroom that was attached room from the kitchen to the living room. 1 bathroom for 4 people. Now you listen to the scenario of home buying, right? Then it has to be that every kid has to have their bedroom and private bathroom, and we need a study room, and we need a game room, and so they, the parents or their parents' parents, had a tiny little house that now we have to move to bigger and bigger. You see, so that's my inheritance. I have a right to inherit more, bigger, more wealth, more. And you see what happens, and here's the last part. It says you comply. What is all of that when it comes to the end? You know the phrase, right? You can't take it with you, but some people try. So I asked the question back to the nurse at the beginning who said, we don't spend enough time reflecting. And so I thought about it in terms of how this is unfolding. Sort of like that quote from Socrates, an unexamined life is not worth living. So I thought, well, what does it mean to have a life that is well lived? You know, in terms of the worldview of Jesus, who has inherited the worldview of God, not in contradiction to or contrast to the worldview that most of us are trapped in some way or another, or worse, enslaved to in other ways. What does it mean, contrasting, to live a well-lived life? I immediately thought this morning, many of you are all familiar about the prosperity gospel. I was trying to think, and I should have done my before the service, trying to do it in the last second year. That this goes back to a Christian evangelical view that suggests that we know we are saved by how prosperous we are. That the more things we have, then that's evidence of the fact that God has blessed us. Something like that, how it goes. Just listen to Joel Osteen or Bruce Meyer, or the one growing up that I always admired was Robert Schuller. And you build an empire, quote, empire, based upon what you're selling to people, that if they just read their Bibles and are good people, that God will bless them with richness beyond imagining. I remember I used to have some liking for Oral Roberts, if you ever remember him, right? And he built this huge medical complex. If you drive through Gulf, I think it's still there. Huge medical, and it was going bankrupt. And so he said, this, I remember watching this, it was just astounding. He just went on about how sad this will be if this complex that I built because God wanted me to build this medical complex where people could be cared for in a Christian way. And now, and he took out his bulging billfold and he dipped it in the pool of water before it, and he held it up to the camera and he said, and now if you just touch your wallets to the TV, God will make your wallets and purses overflow with money so you can send to me so this complex can survive. And I go, holy God, are you kidding me? I had somebody come into the office to see me, they were struggling in their marriage. And they had gone to a church where the pastor told them, you want to know why we're having trouble in your marriage? Because you're not giving enough to the church. My heart sank. You see, the prosperity gospel, whether it's how this worldview of the American way of life is, or a worldview of Christianity, the prosperity gospel says that God intends us to be rich and powerful and mighty and successful, especially successful. And when we're not, you see the focus comes back to be, I must sin some way or another, and God isn't loving me anymore. How can that be? So I went on and I said, well, what is a life well lived? I've got 5 pages of quotes. Don't worry, I'm not going to start them all. But something I just thought, Voltaire says, God gave us the gift of life. It is up to us to give ourselves the gift of living well. Now, maybe that's the origin of it. Here's one by the name of Steve Boudier. I've never heard of him. He says, what if today you gave yourself permission to be outrageously kind? What if you extended as much goodwill and kindness as you can possibly muster to every person you meet? And what if you did it with no thought of reward? I'm sure of one thing, it will be a day you'll never regret. And one more. This comes from Thich Nhat Hanh, a great man mystic who recently died. And he says this: root out the violence in your life and learn to live compassionately and mindfully. Seek peace. When you have peace within, real peace with others is possible. When you have peace within, real peace with others is possible. Now, one point, and I've got about 5 more minutes, please. He says, learn to live compassionately. I kept the reading from Hosea for a reason. To me, there are 3 things to keep in mind about God. That first of all, the Exodus story tells us that God is always about liberating and setting free from slavery. The second one is in Genesis, that God is a God who always creates life, who calls forth life. And this text in Hosea is the third point. Hosea is a prophet in the 8th century when the northern kingdom has been destroyed by Assyria, and the armies of Assyria are encamped outside the walls of Jerusalem. There were people inside Jerusalem, priests in the temple and prophets who were saying, not worry, peace, peace, peace. God, we're the chosen people. Inheritance. We're the chosen people. God will take care of us. God will protect us. But we're not going to have to make any changes in our life. So we're quite happy about oppressing the needy. And you can read Isaiah the same things. That we're quite happy with the crazy lifestyle that we've got. Because after all, we're the chosen people and God's going to bless us and there'll be peace. And Hosea goes, oh my gosh, you are so far off track on that. That God expects you to have a life worth living in accord with not just command, but in accord with this vision. And so Hosea says, don't you remember people? When you were a child, I was the one who loved you and cared for you. I have visions in my head, and those of you who have children, you know this. Visions in my head of scraping my knee and running to my mother. My mother was the primary one. My father worked during the day. My mother was the one. And having my mother, how many of you as parents have to kiss the boo-boo of your child, right? God is saying that to Israel. You are ready to be destroyed by the Assyrians. And frankly, I'm about ready to quit you. Because I've done everything in my power to love you, and all you can do is spit in my face and turn your back on me. It's just like the parent who at a certain point, whether it's teenage years or young adult years, who you've done everything, fed and clothed them and educated them and done everything you have. And the minute that the kid says to you, I hate you, you just go, what have I done to deserve that? And God says, I've done everything to love you and care for you and heal your wounds and lift you up. I've done everything for you. And this is the thanks that I get. This is the thanks that I get. I'm just about, and I can just see the image because I don't know if it's true, but I can just see the image where, and it says, the word in the text says, recoils. The word recoil is used in the text. And I can just see it. That God goes, one more thing from you. One more spit in the face from you. One more thing that you just tell me to get lost, to get out of your life. One more thing. And you can just see, and it's just like, sometimes it's so true. You just want to wring their necks, shake them. And some parents shake too hard and the kids die, right? That I want to shake some sense into you. And God's at that point, and God says, I'm just going to shake you until you realize how much I've been loving you and caring for you, and you don't seem to care at all. And then this point, the translation is not very good. But it says, but something stirs inside God. Something deep in the heart of God stirs. Now you see in the text, the word that gets translated, it says, it grows warm and tender inside God. Or another translation would say, compassionate. Now, you need to keep in mind that if God is liberator, setter free, creator, calling to life, that God is also, well, the word in Hebrew is Rahim. And Rahman is womb. Womb. And so the text suggests that and you can just see that God's hands is like one more thing. And all of a sudden, God stops. This is my daughter, my son. I'm connected at a level to this child like nothing else. And God's heart is moved to the deepest level, beyond compassion, beyond empathy, that God's heart is moved with such powerful, womb-like mother love. That notice the text says that God goes, wow, that was really close. And now I know that my mother-like love will always listen, will always be there for you. You can count on this and trust this, that there isn't anything that you do that will stop my womb-like mother love for you. Nothing. In Thich Nhat Hanh's quote, he says, to live compassionately. You want to know what a life well lived looks like? Compassion. Always compassion. And it's damn hard some days to do that, isn't it? When you see the idiots and the stupidity of people out there in the world, it's damn hard to have compassion. You want to have pity. And in some translations, that's what it comes out to be. And Jesus was moved with pity. It says he felt sorry for that person. But does that move you to act on their behalf when you have pity? No. Gee, I really feel sorry for you that you're down on life, that you've lost everything, that you're lying in the gutter, beat up by robbers. And just like the priest of the Levite, you walk right on by. Compassion moves you a little bit closer, because in that instance, compassion says, you know, I have a sense that this is so terrible. Not that maybe I've ever been in that place, but compassion moves me closer to that reality. And the word actually could be even the deepest level of empathy. Empathy suggests. And this is also in the courtroom, right? Where people throw themselves at the mercy of the court so that the judge will feel sorry for them and let them off. That's not it at all.
John, you know.
And by the way, mercy is the same word as compassion.
I'll bet people are having a heart attack.
Compassion. And so here the sense is that to live a life worth living, or to live well life, means that at the heart and the soul of who we are has to first be that we always are a people who liberate and set others free. Not in a way that we feel sorry for them, but in a way that we're stepping into their life, attached and committed to them in the same way that a mother remains always, and a father can remain so committed to their child that they're willing to take on the abuse because love is stronger than the abuse. And therefore, to live a life worth living and live a well-lived life means to be centered, grounded, rooted, that compassion will permeate through who we are, out of us. And you see, when that compassion heals, makes whole, sets free, lifts up, moves us to act, to make a world different. Then it will, and we will, be living in accord with the world in which we are.